Hi, everyone. Welcome to the June 4th presentation of our operating series here. This is Roll Anders, K3RA. And of course, Tom, K3YH, is with me here. Hi, Tom. And we also have today Andy Protigal, N3AWP, and Dan Wilt, N3YQ. And the subject of tonight's presentation, as you see up on the screen, is emergency communications and public service. So Dan and Andy are extremely well suited to do this presentation as they are emergency coordinators for Howard County, Maryland here. And have been doing this for a good number of years, working primarily with the Columbia Amateur Radio Association, which is a public service oriented club. Of course, they do lots of stuff, Hamfest and all kinds of things, but they are very active in public service communications. So that's where he gets his connections for his team, but he works throughout the entire county here. So without any more jabber from me, let me turn it over to Andy. Hi, Andy. How you doing?
Hey, Roll. Hey, everybody. Thank you for inviting me to attend this evening and to provide this presentation. I'm always flattered by the invitation. I'm happy to help out where I can. So just a little background on myself. I've been licensed since about 2010 and have gravitated, so to speak, towards public service on the basis that I used to be a volunteer firefighter, and that there's a kind of an inherent connection with the desire to volunteer and to give back to the community vis-a-vis what I did as a volunteer firefighter. And I translate that same motivation to amateur radio and supporting the community, giving back to the community in ways that I can. So I just wanted to add that as part of why I have gotten into, public service to the extent that I have, but also how I've stepped up to support both RACES and ARES. Dan, N3YQ, who will be following my presentation this evening, is the Howard County RACES reporting officer, and myself as the ARES emergency coordinator. We do a tag team hybrid type of capability for the county to provide an emergency communication service to those who may be interested. So with that, let me go into the next slide. I guess one question, one thought, one concept I want to present to everybody is, what is emergency communications? And you could probably find any number of definitions or any number of references to what emergency communications are or what they could be. But a definition that I often refer to is one that was provided by DHS and CISA. And basically, from their National Emergency Communication Plan, emergency communication is the means and methods for exchanging information, not just communication, but information necessary for successful incident management. And I thought that was a pretty all-encompassing expression of what emergency communications relates to. So I wanted to present that this evening as the basis of what we will be referring to as emergency communications in our presentations. And with that, I think we would all agree that emergency communications must be time sensitive. They're critical and that time matters. They're also incident focused, and they typically occur within a defined area among specified entities. That could be a unit, a team, and individuals who are supporting an emergency function or an emergency response function. So I've alluded to, emergency conditions are really the highest precedence of communications that we can deal with. Predominantly, they are related to saving lives, protecting property, which in any situation takes precedent over everything else. If there's a life to be saved or property to be protected, that comes first before we do anything else. So just to highlight the importance of emergency communications contextually and what we relate to in terms of supporting that capability. Now, that does not mean or it is not meant to exclude the fact that emergency communications also occur in disaster conditions, that is, to support a disaster response and recovery. I mean, what we do, the capabilities we rely upon, the procedures we follow are all emergency communications related, but we can also apply that expertise, that knowledge, that capability to supporting disaster related conditions and other conditions that relate to a particular need or particular capability to resolve a problem or to provide assistance when that assistance is necessary. So with that, I want to also introduce the idea of auxiliary communications, really that relate to communications that takes place in other times of particular need, where we augment communication capabilities and capacity for a particular function to provide situational awareness, i.e. during severe weather, to help disseminate information to the public, to provide health and welfare messages to those who are trying to get messages to loved ones about their particular status or their particular situation, and overall to enhance community communication capabilities and resiliency. So these really encompass the broad spectrum of emergency communications, but again, emergency conditions where we're providing communication support to save lives and protect property are the highest precedence of communications that we would ever provide. Why amateur radio? I mean, are there not communication capabilities that are designed and specifically built for this purpose? And the answer, of course, is yes, there are. But why amateur radio? And a lot of it relates to the fact that within the amateur radio community, we have a lot of skilled and experienced operators. And now, the skill and experience is broad in spectrum in terms of, for example, you may have operators who are more skilled at contesting, and then they are skilled at providing messages. That's fine. They have a particular skill, they have particular experience, they have abilities to communicate in adverse conditions, in challenging conditions, and they have a persistence, an ability to get the message through. All right. Now, also within amateur radio, we have multiple diverse capabilities that are independent of established infrastructure, i.e., we can pretty much set up a radio where and when we choose to do so and establish an ability to communicate with one another to get messages, information from point A to point B. Now, that doesn't happen with with a wave of magic wand. Of course, there are challenges with how that takes place. But inherently within the amateur radio community, we have that ability. And with that, we promote an ability to bring both fixed and transportable capabilities to a situation to provide communications where that communications may not otherwise be possible. And with that, we have a desire within the community to provide help when needed. As I mentioned, as a former volunteer firefighter, and where I've developed an interest in giving back to the community, I think that is true of many of us. And not necessarily as volunteer firefighters per se, but as volunteers in other capacities where we have a strong desire to give back and help when needed. So you've probably heard the saying, when all else fails, thousands of times. And of course, this is very indicative and relates directly to amateur radio capabilities. And this is something that we all can relate to and we should all, quite frankly, be proud about. But I want to emphasize to you that we must respect the fact agencies and various organizations have made significant investments to harden their communication capabilities so that they have a better ability to provide communications in a disaster situation. That is to say, not that that is to say they want to be able to provide communications themselves and not necessarily rely upon amateur radio, but it's also reflective of the fact that they have a job to do. They want to make sure that they have the best means to do their job and to also build confidence within the communities that they serve that they're in a good position to support the jobs that they're being asked to do. So I just wanted to emphasize this fact because a lot of folks take this a little too much, go a little too far with this when all else fails type of presentation, and just say, well, amateur radio is going to save the day because there's nothing else is going to compare with it. No, that is not necessarily true in every situation. The fact of the matter is, folks are building resilient communications because they're expected to do so. Amateur radio can be a component of how resilient communications is provided, but it is not the only component of that capability. Consider that amateur radio capabilities are not designed or intended to replace complex communication systems. So when you look at what we can provide in the way of communications, we're not able to provide high capacity data traffic. We don't have the ability. We're not licensed to do so. So we need to really be careful, quite frankly, when we say when all else fails. But that is not intended to take anything away from the fact that when there are no other means available, we can be there to help provide communications to help get the message through. Of course, you've probably all seen this 1,000 times, but I feel it's important to reflect upon the fact that within Part 97, the FCC specifically calls out the fact that amateur radio operators have abilities inherent to their service that can be used to support emergency communications. And so when providing the communication support in this capacity, I recommend, I request that all of us keep this in mind, that we are licensed as amateur radio operators and we are expected to some extent to provide this capability to support those in our community. That does not mean to say that everybody needs to provide this support, but there's a fair expectation that we as a community of operators who have specific capabilities are going to be available to provide emergency communications when that service is necessary, when it can be beneficial. But with that, I want to emphasize that we have a responsibility as amateur radio operators. And with that, we need to take into consideration that we set impressions with everything we do. We unfortunately have set some pretty bad impressions. We can't help that, but we can certainly moderate that and improve the impressions that we set for all by demonstrating that we are folks who take our, I'll say, job seriously, that we take providing emergency communications seriously enough to honor those that we support, to demonstrate that we are able to support those we are choosing to support in a meaningful way, and that we're not going to do so in a cavalier, casual way. We're doing this because we want to do this. So with that, I will promote the following ideas. Complete certification and credentialing. You want to demonstrate to those that you are supporting that you're willing to be certified, that you're willing to go through the credentialing process they would like you to go through, because you're now demonstrating that you want to be part of the team. You don't want to have someone say, well, all these amateur radio operators are out there and they're not taking the job seriously, or they don't want to do this seriously enough. This is one way that we can demonstrate to those that we support that we do in fact take emergency communications seriously. We're willing to go through the certification process. We're willing to be credentialed. We're willing to be part of the team because that's what everybody else is doing as well. Keep in mind that individual actions reflect upon all amateur radio operators. So if you walk into a situation with a bad attitude, guess what? That attitude is going to translate to others, even if they are not associated with the situation in question. So I just ask that you keep that in mind as well. Something you should hear from those you support, if you have not, is don't speak for the served agencies. Let them do their job. If we are asked to provide a comment on a situation, We can certainly say that we're an amateur radio organization supporting a named partner, and then identify the public information officer or a representative from that served agency who can then speak to the situation at hand more effectively. We do not want to be viewed as a solution looking for a problem. This is one of my pet peeves, and I always feel compelled to emphasize this. We want to be viewed as a capability, as a tool, as a resource that can be placed in the service when needed. But we don't want to be that organization or that individual who promotes themselves in a way that suggests they can do everything that's without question. All right, we want to promote our capabilities in an objective way, and we don't want to over promote what we do because that just causes others to form a unconfident impression about what we're capable of doing. Another thought that I want to emphasize, and I apologize in the matter of speaking if you've heard this before, but as amateur radio operators and as those who want to volunteer to help out, we never want to deploy to an incident without appropriate coordination, because what that then does is it makes those who are responding to a situation, it makes their job more complicated. We don't want to be part of the problem. We want to be part of the solution. And if we're in a situation or an area that we should not be in, all that does is inhibit the job, makes the job more complicated. We don't want to be in that situation. All right. We do not want to be that person who over promotes their role, their capabilities, their authorities. We have no authorities, by the way. All right. But we do have capabilities. We are a resource. We are a tool that can be placed into service to help those who may need that support. Okay, getting off my soapbox a little bit. So amateur radio communications occurs at many levels, of course, at the ARES level and at the RACES level, which you probably have heard about here and there, but also at the National Traffic System level. In fact, the relay in the American Radio Relay League name refers to the National Traffic System. MARS is also an aspect of emergency communications, as is the ARCNEM program that FEMA runs with CISA. And so there are many, I'll say, services or avenues by which emergency communications, by which amateur radio operators can provide emergency communications. But I also want to emphasize that these are not intended to be competing concepts or competing services. They are really designed and set up to support particular protocols, particular situations, particular requirements of the organizations that those capabilities are designed to serve. So, for example, with RACES, and Dan will talk more about this as he gets into his presentation, RACES is designed predominantly around the ability to support a government entity. ARES, where ARES can do so, ARES is not necessarily designed around that specific premise. It's designed around the premise of supporting any entity, to include non-government organizations, i.e. the Red Cross, United Way, Salvation Army, and others who are out there doing disaster response type activities. And of course, ARCNEM with regards to CISA, the ARCNEM program is designed to identify the requirements, the capabilities, the ways that amateur radio operators and others can support CISA in a situation where they're called out to support. So again, this really is not intended to be a competing type of situation. Each of these services, each of these programs have been created with the intent of identifying how amateur radio operators, and in the case of ARCNEM, how and other operators, can be employed to support a situation that those agencies, those served partners are supporting. Focusing a bit more on the amateur radio service, because that is what my presentation is supposed to be about. ARES was developed and is supported by ARRL. It is comprised of licensed amateur radio operators who have voluntarily registered their qualifications and their equipment with their local area's leadership for communications duty in the public service when disaster strikes, or, and I want to emphasize this, in other times of need. So the emphasis here is that this is a voluntary capability. This is not a requirement of all amateur radio operators, although I alluded to the fact that as amateur radio operators, we should be open-minded about supporting emergency communications when that need exists. The ARES program and also the RACES program, among others, is voluntary oriented. Okay, so no one's going to hold your feet to the fire to support these capabilities. We want you to be involved. We want you to be engaged, but this is obviously a voluntary capability. Training and certification to promote interoperability among all ARES members and at all locations is stressed. The reason for that is we want to promote an ability to bring ARES capabilities from one location, i.e. from Maryland, into neighboring jurisdictions to support them in that in a situation where they might need additional support. So if we're all certified on the same basis, if we're all familiar with the same language, if we're all familiar with terminology and capabilities, then we have an inherent ability to help each other out in a mutual assistance type of compact or construct when that might be needed. I will say in Maryland, we are fortunate in one regard where we don't have a lot of disasters. And of course, I probably just jinxed us. But in other locations, i.e. in California, in the South, where they have obviously a lot more hurricane strikes, wildfires in Colorado, elsewhere, they are more reliant upon amateur radio capabilities, and the need for mutual aid in that capacity may be far greater than we in our world, i.e. in Maryland, can perceive. So again, I want to emphasize that the goal of the ARES service is to promote a unilateral training, a unilateral certification framework so that amateur radio operators can help each other out on a mutual assistance basis. ARES as an organization and as a framework, as an organizational framework and the capability, obviously we're organized at the national, state, and local levels. Locally, we have counties or the lower level jurisdictions where you have emergency coordinators such as myself. At the section level, you'll have a section emergency coordinator, and then you'll have at the division level a higher section or division coordinators that support emergency capabilities. So it's very much a hierarchy. Again, starting at the local level, at the county level, for example, and then moving up at the section level, up through the division to the headquarters in Connecticut. Operators are certified, that is from a training perspective, level 1, 2, or 3, for example, by the local emergency coordinator. I will candidly say that we're in Howard County, we do place a certain amount of emphasis on training in a broad way. We do not promote training at a particular level. We promote training at a more broad level so as to help provide a more even basis among those who are supporting us locally. From an activation perspective, as an emergency coordinator, I can activate the group to support particular emergency communication function, but more directly, we are activated by the organizations we support. To join ARES, here's the link, and this will be in the presentation slides that are shared with everybody. Or if you want to go to the ARRL website and search for ARES, you'll get information about how to join local ARES group. So please feel free to look at that. We encourage folks to join ARES, but let us know if you have any questions. I do want to say a couple words about RACES. Dan will elaborate on this as we go. RACES is a radio service that is identified through the FCC through Part 97. Whoopsie daisy. Much like ARES, RACES can be implemented on a local, regional, and national level. Think of RACES more on the local level, and that on a national level, this is where FEMA and CISA would come in, and they would then refer to ARCNEM type certification of any RACES volunteers. Again, RACES refers to FCC licensed individuals, clubs, or military recreational stations. That's interesting with regards to RACES. And again, from a certification perspective, RACES volunteers are certified locally, state, or national, depending upon the agencies that they are supporting. From an activation perspective, RACES nets are established during or after an emergency and in specific times of need as determined by the served government agency. That is, a RACES reporting officer can really not activate RACES per se during a time or situation without having the served government agency identify that particular need. I do want to say a few words about ARCNEM, but let me also preface that by saying I am not an expert on ARCNEM. I have taken the FEMA ARCNEM course, which I would recommend to all those who are interested. And it really refers to the same types of capabilities that are promoted through ARES and through RACES, but it emphasizes particular functions that CISA refers to when they're asked to come in to support a nationally declared emergency situation. It also refers to the fact that from a communication perspective, they are also relying upon those who have Part 95 type licenses, i.e. GMRS, MERS, and CB capabilities. So they're really looking at radio operations, radio communications from a volunteer level to be more than just amateur radio operators. They could be anybody who is familiar with Part 95 or Part 97. So that's one key difference between the ARCNEM approach and the RACES or ARES approach. Thought that was interesting. Certification is very similar to that which is associated with both ARES and RACES, but as I mentioned before, there are particular, I won't call it nuance, but there are particular requirements and particular aspects of becoming ARCNEM certified that CISA and FEMA stress on the basis that if they want to rely upon you for communications, they expect you to know certain communications terminology, certain functions, and they want you to have a better appreciation of how FEMA and CISA is going to operate. I also want to emphasize, and this was stressed in the course that I took, that as an ARCNEM certified individual, you may not be actively providing communications in an emergency. They may have you doing support functions, i.e. programming radios, or helping others who are doing the radio communications do their job. You may not actually be on the radio communicating from an ARCNEM perspective. So that's something that they emphasize in their training. I think that's pretty interesting. So I should note that some states and some counties now require ARCNEM certification, especially if there's some expectation that FEMA and CISA will be brought into a area to provide assistance, i.e. in a major hurricane strike, for example, or if there's a national, or I should say a wildfire situation that extends beyond the abilities for a state to manage themselves. From an NCOM perspective, please recognize that we are not first responders. That's something I think folks should keep in mind. Our first job is to establish and provide communications and or communication support as appropriately coordinated with the served agency or organization that we respond to. That is to say, our ability to provide and support communication is our best contribution to support those in need. And with that, consider support an organization as a privilege, right? And that's something that we need to be mindful of. So we don't want to walk into a situation or come into a served organization with a very cavalier attitude. We want to identify the fact that we respect what they do, and we want to be part of the solution, not part of their problem. A little bit about emergency communication nets. A net control operator, and many of you are familiar with nets. I won't go into detail about what a net is or what a net is not. We can certainly talk about that if necessary, but I want to emphasize that from an MCOM perspective, the net control operator is the one who implements net protocols to best support the served agency in question. All right, so the operator that is supporting a emergency communication net needs to be one who is familiar with how that organization works, what they need, what they don't need, what their best practices are. As with any net, you want it to be structured yet extensible. That is to scale up or to scale down as need be flexible. And of course, the nets need to be resilient, include alternate and backup capabilities so you can then have a plan to continue that network, that communication support function in the event a repeater goes down, for example. Have a simplex frequency identified, have a backup net controller, have a plan. So from a training focus perspective, the idea is we want to ensure that everybody supporting the net, but in particular the net control operator, is familiar with how the organization works, with their terminology, with their best practices, and then from a practice perspective, practice on how the net is set up, how the net is scaled up or down, how the net would be supported in a challenged situation. All right, I'll probably take a break at this point. Are there any questions at this point? Okay. Tom, from a pace perspective, am I going too fast, too slow? How's the pace?
Seems fine to me, Andy. Anybody with any questions, make sure you send them to Tom K3YH through the chat.
No questions so far.
Okay, I'm not sure if that's a good thing or a bad thing, but
I'd say it means you've got a great comprehensive presentation.
Okay, well, I appreciate that. I appreciate it. Feedback is always good, bad, or indifferent. I always like feedback. So, please feel free to share feedback in the chat if you'd like. I want to mention public service a little bit because although public service is not an emergency communication function, what we do in a public service event can support emergency communication capabilities. And that's a good venue. It's a good opportunity to practice your skills, to identify the capabilities that you want to volunteer to bring to an emergency communication service, i.e. areas of RACES. It's a good training activity. It's an effective means to reach out to others and so forth. But so I want to put some emphasis on public service for that purpose. But I also want to mention that from an Aries and RACES perspective, many clubs, i.e. CARE, for example, or the Anne Arundel Radio Club or the Maryland Mobileers or you name the club, they're the ones who typically support public service activities. But what they support and the efforts that are associated with these activities do translate directly to emergency communications, as I have identified on the slide. They're good training opportunities. It's a good way to test your gear. It's a good way to identify what gear you want to have in a Go kit that would be available to support emergency communications should that be necessary. Likewise, Skywarn is a good means to practice and to gain experience with emergency communications. And of course, the service that amateur radio operators provide to the National Weather Service via Skywarn is very valuable. Many amateur radio operators have supported Skywarn since the program was first conceived, and that effort continues to date. And I want to point out that there is a standing MOU with the ARRL and National Weather Service that I think was last signed in 2011. So it may be due for renewal, but that MOU it continues to stand to this day. I do want to emphasize that Skywarn may not always be associated with Ares or any other emergency communication capability. It may be supported independently of Ares. I know in Maryland, for example, Skywarn is a separate function from Ares. That's just the way it has evolved. But I will also mention that the Skywarn protocols are important, and we refer to those protocols in both the Ares and RACES domains when we provide weather-related information to those who we support. That is to say, when the Skywarn practices and procedures that they rely upon and expect amateur radio operators to support when we're providing weather observations to the National Weather Service, we utilize those same practices and procedures to provide weather observations to, for example, Howard County Office of Emergency Management, or to local hospitals, or whomever we're supporting at that particular time. So the Skywarn practices and procedures are valuable not just to the Weather Service, but to others that we support. And I will encourage everybody who gets into emergency communications, to actively support Skywarn in whatever capacity and via whatever means it is structured in your area. A little bit about what we have going on in Howard County, just as a reference. I want to mention that what we do in Howard County may be completely different. In fact, I know it's different from what they do in Anne Arundel County, our neighboring county to the east. And I know it's different from how things work in Montgomery and Carroll County to our east, to our west and north. But the idea is that each county identifies how, to what extent training, certification, activities are set up based upon I'd say the requirements of their relationship with their served organizations, their served partners. So within Howard County, from a RACES perspective, we have a really well-established relationship with the Office of Emergency Management. We are focused at providing fire station alert communications, but we also translate that capability to supporting communications among shelters, should that be necessary, other key locations, and of course, providing severe weather reporting observations to the Office of Emergency Management from our home location, should that be desired. I.e., this is where we would utilize Skywarn capabilities to support RACES functions and the Office of Emergency Management. From the Ares perspective, it's a recognized capability. We support oops, I have a typo there. We support local hospitals and the Red Cross. We have a relationship with local community organizations active in disaster, COAD, and vis-a-vis that relationship with the state level of the voluntary organizations active in disaster, the VOAD. So I will encourage those who have a COAD locally or a VOAD at the state level to inquire about amateur radio emergency communication support capabilities that may be of interest to their VOAD or COAD leadership. From a training perspective, we do rely upon the ARRL Ares task book.
Andy, before you get into training, can you see the chat window?
No.
All right. Well, I'll just read. So this is kind of a long question. Let me read it for you. It seems like a lot of organizations are struggling with finding purpose in the modern communications environment. A lot of Ares organizations are struggling with finding purpose. So what recommendations would you offer to Ares, ECs, AECs, and members to establish relationships with local served agencies and perform an effective role for them?
That is a very good question. It is also a common challenge that we all have. And that's the challenge that we have to manage, quite frankly. But my recommendation is, especially along the lines of avoiding the impression of being a solution looking for a problem, is to endeavor to invite an Office of Emergency Management representative to a meeting of the Aries or Races organization to have them ask questions and to have a dialogue, to begin a dialogue at that level. Field Day is a very good opportunity to invite your local Office of Emergency Management to attend a field day activity where they can see firsthand the capabilities that you are able to support and to again build a discussion. It's important to establish a discussion based upon a crawl, walk, run type of approach where you identify potential requirements. So for example, you may want to suggest to the Office of Emergency Management, hey, we can support communications amongst shelters if that were to be needed, or if that would be of value to you. They may say no, but at least now what you've done is you started a communication, you started a conversation with them, and maybe they have other requirements or other concepts that they could share with you that you may be able to support. But a dialogue is important, and that's a really good first step in trying to identify, I'm sorry, trying to establish a relationship on your ability to support a requirement that an Office of Emergency Management, for example, may have. Likewise, you may want to reach out to the Red Cross. Depending upon the Red Cross chapter, they work things a little differently, from what I understand. Locally, the Red Cross looks at having general relationships with local amateur radio operators independent of areas and races. They don't want to be, I'll say, bogged down by the Aries races relationship, but they want to be able to reach out to operators and say, hey, we need you to support X. But you can certainly identify your Aries or races organization as a conduit for that communication, i.e., by identifying yourself as an Aries EC or a races member. You can identify yourself to the Red Cross as a conduit by which they can reach out to many folks in your organization. Church groups that support various activities may have a need for communication support. So if you have folks that if their church is active in that type of function, perhaps suggest that as a ability to enhance the way the church, for example, supports that function. But it's a very much a crawl, walk, run type of approach to identify your ability to support a communication need. So I'm hoping that that is one way to establish those relationships. I will also encourage you at the local level to reach out to the folks at the section level to see if they have any best practices that have been used to establish relationships or to begin conversations with potential served agencies. Likewise, they may have a list of served agencies that they support at the section level that might need more broad support locally. And then you can start a conversation locally to how your group would be able to support a broader capability at the section level. Hopefully that helps. Does that answer the question?
Wait for some feedback. So,
Sure.
a question about the answer is yes. Robert N1 OPS said thank you.
Oh, sure. Glad to help. Hopefully it does help.
The and maybe you're going to get to this, is the kind of support that you guys provide primarily, VHF 70 or in 2 meter 70 centimeter, or is there support required on HF bands? And is that something you want to answer now, or
Yeah, I can take that now.
go ahead?
So for the most part, locally, and I think this is true for most local organizations, your support is going to be VHF, UHF. But I will say that it's important to bring in WinLink capabilities to that support posture, even at the VHF, UHF level, because if you have to go outside your jurisdiction, WinLink is one means by which you can do that. So by having a local WinLink capability at a VHF, VHF level, for example, once you hit the WinLink network, WinLink backbone, you're now able to communicate with others who have WinLink access via whatever means. All right, so I will emphasize that point, and that's one of the reasons we stress WinLink in our training activities is so we have folks who are familiar with how to use WinLink should we need to reach out beyond our local area. From an HF perspective, whereas we don't put a lot of emphasis on it, we recognize that HF is a means by, and maybe the only means by which we can reach out beyond our local area should that be necessary. I will candidly say that we probably don't train enough on HF, but we recognize HF capabilities. We have many folks who are familiar with HF capabilities. So obviously, don't exclude HF capabilities from your emergency communications profile.
So, Andy, how does the Saturn network figure into all this?
I know very little about Saturn other than well, obviously it exists, but this gets into what I was referring to earlier that a lot of these services, i.e., RACES versus Aries versus ARCNEM, and I don't mean to say versus, but just on a multilateral level, they have been established on the basis of supporting particular requirements to the organizations that the broad level organizations that they support. So Saturn, as I understand it, and I am not very familiar with Saturn just at a detailed level, but from what the little I know, it is set up to emphasize the use of amateur radio and other capabilities, i.e., Part 95 capabilities, to support Salvation Army type specific requirements. That's about it as far as I am familiar with Saturn. I don't know the details. I would imagine that they have similar training requirements regarding, for example, FEMA courses, the ICS 100, which is the fundamentals of the incident command system, ICS 200, ICS 700, ICS 800, which get into the National Incident Management System, how an EOC operates, uh, the preparedness levels, um, community lifelines, things like that, which are common to any organization that is going to be active in a disaster. There'll be common training. They may offer additional training from a Salvation Army perspective on how the Salvation Army, for example, addresses those particular community lifelines or community needs. So I will leave it at that for fear of going into an area that I know very little about.
Here's another question. So, if you're just getting started, you're interested in participating and helping. What's your suggested approach? How would you? What do I do if I want to get involved?
Great question. First, I recommend trying to find a local club. A local club will have some experience, I would hope, reaching out to local leadership, local section leadership, for example, identifying the folks who are local and active in emergency communications support, i.e., your local area's EC, the local RACES reporting officer, or other individuals who support emergency communications, i.e., a Saturn person, for example. As I mentioned, referring to the ARRL website where they list areas organizations, so that might allow you to navigate what organizations exist in your state or local area. But I think the first recommendation is to find a club and to either join a club or ask them who if they can help put you in contact with those who support emergency communications in your local area.
If you do a search in the ARL affiliated club directory area on that ARL.org website, they tell you what the club's interests are. So some clubs don't do any public service or emergency, and some focus almost totally on it. So if you're interested in that, you might find a club in your area that lists amongst their interests, emergency comms or public service. That would help you find one in your area that would suit what you're looking for.
Yeah. I will add that joining a radio club is something I recommend doing anyway. I've learned more vis-a-vis my association with CARA about amateur radio than I think I would have been able to do on my own. And that I look at that as a multiplier, and just being able to learn about amateur radio and its various aspects of the multifaceted capabilities that exist. Um, I think, quite frankly, I think I would have given up in some areas. I probably would not be where I'm at with regards to supporting the community, for example, or even with regards to having an advanced license, if I had not joined CARA. So I highly recommend getting involved with the local club and multiple clubs, for example. Each club has its own personality. And I will tell you that in Maryland, at least from a CARA perspective, we try to promote clubs at Unilateral. So at our Hamfest that we run in October, we invite local clubs to set up information tables because we want others to know about other clubs and what their particular specialities may be. Um, so we look at this as in a very fraternal way. But again, join a club, get to know them, ask questions.
Little bit of a different topic. Has amateur regulations regarding encryption ever been an issue when trying to provide emergency communication support?
That's an interesting question, and I'm going to provide some information, at least from my perspective, but you could probably take that question and have any number of conversations with it. But obviously, from a health perspective, from an amateur radio perspective, everything that we provide through amateur radio communications is open. So we're not going to be providing personal, privileged, private information through amateur radio because it's in the open. All right. So one would say, well, that then inhibits what amateur radio can do in particular situations. Well, yes, that is very true. Um, but that does not exclude us for example, from sending health and welfare messages on a general basis. All right. So the the question of encryption really from the FCC's from an FCC perspective, amateur radio communications will always be open, but that then precludes us from sending particular information in the clear, if you will. That does not prevent us from doing that if that is necessary, but it does raise the question of what type of information do we want to be able do we want to have in our hands. Um, So I will leave it at that because that could really be a very complex conversation, and I'll just let it go at that. I will say that the data rate, which, as many of you have known, has recently been increased. Maybe it's been a year or two now, but the data rate increase, the symbol rate, is a factor because now, with the relaxation of data rate limitations, we can take more full advantage of the bandwidth available to us to send information at higher rates. That has been a very proactive step in our ability to support emergency communications.
All right, that's everything I have right now. More questions, please go ahead and feed them to me.
And I appreciate all the questions. Please know that there are some questions I can't answer. I will let you know if I can't answer it. I don't have experience with it, and I will do my best to preface the questions, my answers as needed. All right. So from a training perspective,
Yeah, let me,
this
by
is
the way, I see you're getting to Skywarn on this.
yeah.
I think a lot of people may not be aware of Skywarn, so when you get to that bullet, maybe you can
Oh,
explain
sure.
a little bit.
Okay.
Thanks.
All right. So from a training perspective, we generally follow the Aries task book for core knowledge and emphasis on the National Incident Management System and the Incident Command System. By the way, the National Incident Management System, the ICS Incident Command System, these are systems, practices, procedures that have been implemented across the nation. These are not local. So it's critically important to understand these systems and these practices and procedures so that you can effectively communicate in these realms. If you can't communicate in these realms, then we're not supporting any. We're doing more harm than good, basically. So I want to emphasize. I will say some of these courses are dry, they're repetitive, they're not the most interesting, but they're necessary, and so I want to emphasize that. Okay, off my soapbox. So from a RACES perspective, we really focus on understanding how fire and EMS dispatch procedures are set up, nomenclatures with regards to apparatus, station identifier, station practices, the difference between a truck and a tower unit, for example, the difference between a paramedic and an ambulance unit, the differences between particular specialty vehicles. That type of training, that type of familiarization is more at the RACES level, as specific to how we support the local Office of Emergency Management. And then from a Skywarn perspective, I'll emphasize this as Tom requested. So Skywarn is a National Weather Service program. It is not associated, let me restate that. Skywarn is a National Weather Service program. There's a memorandum of understanding between the National Weather Service and the ARRL on how amateur radio operators can support the Skywarn program, but Skywarn is not exclusively an amateur radio dependent program. They rely upon Jane and John Q. Public, who may not have radio capabilities, to provide observations on severe weather through the internet, through the cell phone, through other means by calling the Weather Service office, the forecast office in question. So it's really a program that is intended to help the Weather Service get ground truth on severe weather activity so that they can use that information more directly locally to inform how warnings and advisories are issued, to help identify where, for example, a model might need to be tweaked for a high rainfall prediction model, for example. It helps identify activity that the radar service cannot see through its systems. Granted, it has some pretty exquisite capabilities, satellites, advanced radar, you name it. But with all that sophisticated capability, there are still things that the Weather Service cannot see on the ground, and they rely upon people, basically, to help identify that phenomenology back to the Weather Service so they can inform local others more accurately and more specifically, and they can also tweak their models for how they provide warnings and advisories to the general public. So again, the Skywarn program is a weather service. It is not exclusive to amateur radio operators. It's designed to help the Weather Service get ground truth from physical observations, i.e., individual observations, back to the local forecast office. All right. And obviously, amateur radio can facilitate that by providing those observations via radio capability versus a cell phone or internet capability, to help them in that mission. Now, of course, Skywarn evolved in the 60s and 70s, and I don't know the exact date when it started, but it's been around for a while. In an era when cell phone and internet was not part of our everyday life. So you pretty much had to call the Weather Service office to report an observation. Well, if you're unable to call the Weather Service observation for whatever reason, amateur radio was another means by which those observation reports could be provided back to the Weather Service. And in fact, many weather forecast offices, to include Sterling, where the Baltimore, Washington office is based, have amateur radio operator stations in their forecast office. They may not be manned, or I should say staffed, 24/7, but they do have the ability to interact with amateur radio operators when they are staffed to that accordingly. So it's an interesting capability. Obviously, amateur radio operator can benefit the Skywarn program, and we do our best to do that. But with regard to Skywarn in so much as we want to help the Weather Service, the practices, the procedures that the Skywarn training includes, we utilize those procedures to inform those we support through areas and races, i.e., the Howard County Office of Emergency Management, or a local hospital, or a local organization that we are supporting at any given time. We use those procedures unilaterally. Okay, and then of course we have regular drills, nets, and activities to provide opportunities to utilize the training that we emphasize. All right, Tom, any more questions about Skywarn or anything on this slide?
Not right now. Go ahead.
Okay. All right, so here's an eye chart on where we have, from a certification level within Howard County areas races. Now, as I mentioned earlier, we do not place emphasis on level 1 versus level 2 versus level 2A versus level 3. This is just there to show we have a system. For those who are interested in referring to a system, we have a system by which we can refer to levels or particular training activities or particular classes should that be necessary. We generally promote the core training and core activities to all our members unilaterally, and we do not necessarily refer to, well, Joe's at level 1 and Tina's at level 3 and all this. We look at this in a very homogenous manner. We look at this as a group-oriented, service-oriented capability, and not so much on is Joe or Tina or Sam at level 1 versus level 2. But we have the framework in place should there be questions about doing that, or should there be questions about how does one pursue the training track? Is there a training track? So this is the answer to that question. I do want to mention that we came up with, or I don't want to toot my own horn here, but I feel compelled to do it because this is an important topic. We created a railroad hazard awareness course for our members. And you might think, well, what? Why is that necessary? Well, in Howard County, we have two major rail lines that pass through the county, one towards the east along parallel to Route 1 and one along the Patapsco River. And many of the public service events that we support, when I say we, this time I put my carry hat on, we are at positions near the railroad. And so with that in mind, I thought it was necessary, and this was actually a recommendation from one of our members, to put together a railroad hazard awareness course. The reason I'm mentioning this now is I want to encourage anybody who is in areas and races or any other service really to think about classes and training activities that are specialized for your specific location. All right. So if you're near a rail line, put together a railroad hazard awareness course that makes sense for your area. Or if you're near a chemical plant, for example, or near an industrial area, or you name it, think about putting together classes and training activities that are specific to those infrastructure capabilities, so that you as an emergency communicator are aware of that particular facility or particular hazards associated with that facility or infrastructure. It's all about awareness. It's all about being in a good position to support the community. I'll get off that soapbox. All right, so from a drill and exercises perspective, we obviously play a lot of emphasis on summer and winter field day, more summer than winter, but field day is a big component of what we do for training activity. We promote field day because there's so much that folks can gain and experience through field day. We do messaging and reporting drills from both a mixed analog and digital perspective. We are putting more emphasis on digital, specifically with regards to FL-Digi, for those who are familiar with FL-Digi, and also WinLink. Fire station learning drills, for the obvious reason that is our primary support functions at the Howard County Office of Emergency Management. We do nominal missing person training activities, field communication exercises. We do have an HF activation drill. That is our token, if you will, HF activation, but we we do HF activation, go kit shakeouts, making sure everybody has a go kit, and actually that is a good activity for folks who are trying to build a go kit. We basically do a show and tell activity so folks can compare apples and oranges to see what works, what doesn't work, help each other gain ideas on how to put together a go kit. Skywarn Recognition Day, the first Saturday in December, National Weather Service Skywarn Recognition Day. We encourage members to participate in it. Various hospital drills, simulated emergency tests for the ARES program. I won't get into too much detail given time constraints, but we can talk about that if you want to. And of course, classroom and self-paced training, predominantly that is focused at FEMA courses. And that brings me to the end of my my presentation. So I'm happy to answer any questions, talk about any things that folks want to talk about. I see Dan's is there, so we can go to Dan's presentation.
Any more questions? Anybody have anything they want to ask? Chime in.
Okay. Well, I will hang out for Dan's
Some
presentation.
comments, by the way. Feedback is that your pace is great and it's very comprehensive. So thanks from a number of participants on your pitch. It's good.
Okay. Well, thank you very much. I look at myself as one who tries to help others. Sharing my experience, my perspective, other perspectives exist. So I don't want to present myself in any unique way. I'm just one of the folks who are trying to do good things for the group.
You're selling yourself short. I know Andy very well, and he's very hardworking and very, very committed to this. A lot of people strut around and say when all else fails, but I know you guys are the ones who are making sure of that.
All right. Well, thank you very much. So I will mute and pass the baton to Dan. Thank you all and again, thank you for inviting me to present today.
All right, thank you, Andy. Can you hear me? Is my audio okay?
Yes, sir. We hear you fine.
All right.
Hi, Dan. Good to see you.
Yeah. Let me share my presentation and put it in presentation mode. Okay. So hopefully you can see my.
We see your PowerPoint window, and if you go to presentation, it'll fit the whole screen.
Okay. There we go. Okay.
Perfect. Looks good.
So I'm Dan Wilt. I'm the Howard County Races Officer, and of course Andy is the Howard County ARES Emergency Coordinator, and we basically work hand in hand for emergency communications in the county. I am his assistant ARES EC, and he is one of my assistant races officers. So that's sort of a very quick introduction to what I'm doing and what I'm going to talk about. Let's see. Let me just move ahead. A lot of what I'm going to say is going to duplicate Andy, and so I'm going to try and move fairly quickly and maybe make some additional comments that weren't included in Andy's presentation. So Andy mentioned this. Races is a standby radio service. It's covered in the Part 97 regulations, and it's an outgrowth of the civil defense activities of the last century, and it consists of ham radio operators who are registered with the local government and who are trained and authorized to communicate during emergencies. In the extreme case, it's possible to have situations where regular ham radio activity is forbidden, and in that situation, the local government can authorize races operators to continue to communicate in support of an emergency or disaster. Okay, moving forward. Howard County races. A our local government, Howard County, is our served agency, and RACES falls under the Department of Fire and Rescue Services Office of Emergency Management. So the OEM is part of the department here. And our primary mission is to support DFRS, and specifically our primary mission is to provide backup to the county 911 emergency dispatch system. However, as proficient communicators, we are authorized or enabled to support other missions as well. And Andy mentioned, for example, shelter communications and other activities in the community. Andy, I think, mentioned this, but Howard County has been really terrific in their support of RACES and ARES, and have invested a great deal in our capability and continue to respond to our needs. In particular, all of our CARA is the local ham radio club. All of CARA's repeaters are at Howard County sites. And so, being at those sites, they have access to very capable emergency power and backup power, including both battery backups as well as diesel generator backups. And they're also protected by fences and locks and things like that. So the equipment is in a very safe place, and it runs right alongside county communications equipment, including like the education system as well as other, the fire department and police and other activities. So there was a question, I think, sort of related to how did you establish that relationship, and I really can't speak to the specifics here in Howard County. Most of the hard work was done before I was involved with Howard County RACES, but my general guidance is, Andy said it right, don't be a solution in search of a problem, but particularly through CARA, we support a lot of public service activities, and that's quite visible to the county and other communities where we do public service activity. And through that, I think the county has come to appreciate that we're called amateurs, but we're quite professional in how we communicate. And beyond that, getting to know if you have an ARES activity in your community, that is one point of contact you have. Through ARRL, you can find out who your section lead is, who your section emergency coordinator is, and they can probably give you good guidance who to talk to. The other avenue is to have a discussion with whatever your local community has for emergency management. In our case, OEM, which is part of the Department of Fire and Rescue. And they may not be familiar with what you do. I would just say if they aren't or don't seem to be interested, just let them know who you are and what you do, and let things take whatever their natural course is. Okay, the RACES team. I'm the RACES officer. You see a little bit more about me here. I was first licensed in 1969 in California, as you can probably tell by the 6 call. Nowadays, I mostly work on VHF, UHF because of my involvement with RACES and with public service. And I'm sort of the local reference for digital communication modes, FLDigi and WinLink. I have HF equipment and occasionally use it, but I live in the People's Republic of Colombia, as we call it, which tends to have limits on external antennas. I'm a physicist by training, and I work for Johns Hopkins University. My background is optical communications, electronic hardware, and I spent a fair amount of my time working on undersea cables. I started my career at Bell Labs, and I've been at Johns Hopkins from 2005 to now. Andy is one of my assistant RACES officers. John Wilson is another assistant RACES officer, and he's also our repeater license trustee for K3CUJ, which is Kara's call sign. And Mike Olson is also an assistant RACES officer. He's very knowledgeable about networking and other important technology that we use. Amelia Williams is our Office of Emergency Management Senior Emergency Management Specialist, and she is our connection point to DFRS and OEM. And Andy and I and the assistant officers, if they're available, meet with her every month to talk about our drills, our activities, and we also keep her apprised of our public service events if they may be of interest to her. The things we do, and I sort of put it in 4 buckets. 1 is we prepare, 2 is we train, 3 is we practice, and 4 is we do deploy. On the prep side, we emphasize having a go kit. It doesn't have to be a really fancy one. You just need to know where your equipment is, how you're going to pack it up, and so that you're prepared to go as quickly as possible. Portable antennas, radios, emergency power, other essentials to operate in challenging conditions. We also emphasize safety and emergency preparedness at home. Often if Andy or I or one of our members is going to be out of the house in a disaster or other situation, you'll want to make sure your people at home know what to do and are well prepared. We train, Andy mentioned most of these, on the FEMA, ICS, net operations, emergency communications discipline, and the Skywarn. We do drills, tests, and exercises, including the summer and winter field days, and we practice digital skills. One of the things we do every week is we have a weekly Aries Races Net, and everyone is welcome to join it, but it's basically checking out radios, talking about things of interest, letting people know about public service events and training exercises. And we also follow our VoiceNet every week with a digital practice, and we alternate FLDigi and WinLink weekly. We practice, try and deliver simulated real-life experience as comm support at public service events, and those exercise all the capabilities we want to have during emergencies. And the public service events, we occasionally have things that exercise all of our capability, including like bicycle accidents, heat stroke, broken bones, things like that. We do not care for them. Our job is to communicate, but we do try to make sure that our people have at least a basic first aid training. We deploy, we do storm reporting, particularly during the winter, snow accumulations, ice accumulations, fallen trees, things like that. One of our primary missions is to be available during 911 outages. We haven't had one in a while, but they do happen, usually due to an accidental cable cut. We provide support to the Maryland Department of Emergency Management, and typically we'll have 1 or 2 of these kind of events per year. Most often it's weather related. And the events we do in Patapsco State Park, those are events that DFRS is not really well able to support because they're in a river canyon, and so DFRS sort of counts on us to be available for those events, to be able to call the first responders when they're needed. In the picture there, that's my simple setup at Patapsco Valley State Park, which I just mentioned, and we support a lot of runs and bicycle rides and other similar events in that park. Our drills, tests, and exercises, they're usually 1 or 2 hours on Saturday mornings, and we try to do one a month. I won't go through these in detail because I think Andy covered all of them. So, and the picture there is my setup in front of, I think I called that Fire Station 6. I'm pretty sure that's Fire Station 6, but Andy, I think, corrected me. It may be Fire Station 2. Yeah, it's Fire Station 2. So, okay, public service events. Andy didn't mention these other generally. One of the big ones we do is the Civil War Century. That's a 100-mile bike ride through a fairly challenging course. It goes over a local ridge and has a really hard climb to begin with, and another hard climb at roughly the midpoint. And it goes from Thurmont, which is the midpoint of the course, down to Antietam, and then up to Gettysburg. It's a full day. Lots of riders who can't finish the course. It's done in the middle of the summer, or actually, I'm sorry, it's September. And we do tend to get a lot of heat and sometimes rain, so the riders often need to be helped. The Labor Day Classic is a simple event that I run. That's just here for completeness. And that's just a 10K, 6K. The Foxcatcher is a really fun event. It's a horse endurance event held at Fair Hill State Park. Andy runs that one. And it's a full day of horses and riders and a lot of interesting kind of events they do. Klondike Derby, that's the Boy Scouts simulating the Klondike Gold Rush, again in Patapsco State Park. Patapsco 50K is a trail running ultra marathon. I find it amazing, but they're doing, I think it's 30 miles up and down the walls of that river canyon, and so it's really pretty challenging for those folks. And the Maryland Heat Race is an endurance run in the same general area. And generally we're there to monitor the runners, riders, whatever they are, and if they're injured or hurt or need to be picked up and taken back to the start finish, we can call in people to have that done. And we emphasize that our people are not expected to do things that they're not trained for example, first aid. Andy pretty much covered this one. Races is that FCC authorized standby communication service. ARES is a U.S.-Canada NGO sponsored by the ARRL, and those ARES is a national organization, and ARES volunteers can be deployed widely. A good example was during Katrina. Many operators went down to New Orleans because their communication infrastructure was completely shut down for an extended period. Hurricane Maria in Puerto Rico is another example where ARES operators deployed. I think Andy probably said this, but in Howard, ARES and RACES are very closely aligned. Most of our RACES members are members of ARES and vice versa. We strongly encourage our RACES folks to become Skywarn spotters, since many of our activations are weather related, and being in all three of those organizations makes our people deployable as RACES in HOCO and Howard County, that is, and as areas mutual assistance teams in the surrounding counties. I'll just let people stare at this slide for a bit. It describes what we do to get people into RACES. We emphasize you do not need to be a county resident to be a member of RACES, although they all live within driving distance of Howard County, so they can deploy. We suggest they start by checking into our weekly nets just to hear what's going on and what we're doing. We have an application which is really just a survey of what radio capabilities and training the applicant has. After we get that information, Howard County, because we're badged to go into their facilities, requires a background check. It's a very simple check and usually only takes a week or two. It's handled directly by the Office of Emergency Management, and once that's completed, they issue a county badge that our people carry. We also have a county notification system that will send alerts to email, to cell phones, and to whatever else people have. We ask people to join that. They have a channel in Everbridge that's only for Aries RACES, and so we don't get pestered with all of the county's alerts. We only get alerts that are for amateur radio operators. And Andy mentioned all of the training, and I won't say anything further. What we require of our members, it's not that much. We ask that they check into that weekly net at least 8 times a year. And by the way, these are not hard and fast requirements. It's just a suggestion. We ask they participate in drills and exercises and tests at least once a quarter. We ask they participate in a public service event because that's as close as we get to how we would deploy at least once every 2 years. And we ask them to refresh their FEMA ICS training every 3 years. And then we ask they participate at least once every 3 years in the fire station alerting exercise, which is our primary mission. MEMA, which is the Maryland Emergency, actually it's MDMA now, that's a typo. They changed their name. But they have a monthly communications exercise. We ask they try and do that once every 3 years. And also in an ICS 213, which is a general message format used in ICS, and participate in one of those kind of exercises every 3 years. For advanced capabilities, we ask our operators to be proficient in FLDIGI and WinLink. We hold at least a couple of training exercises in addition to those weekly nets. And we've actually made really great progress in our last fire station alerting drill. All but 2 of our stations were able to copy FLDIGI, which is what we use for those exercises. So that's really improved over time. We offer opportunities, and we ask people to try out net control operations. Usually the easiest way to do that is our weekly nets. EOC operations, that's not generally available, but we do that as part of our monthly MDEM communication exercise, so that's an opportunity we offer to people. The simulator emergency test, Andy covered those, and leading activity drills, classes, and exercises is another way they can advance. And that's pretty much what I wanted to say. I'd like to note that it's work, but it's also a lot of fun and rewarding. I've met a lot of really interesting people, not just the people in RACES, but in the events we support. And I'm really impressed by the number of volunteers that we have in the area, because you see them at most of our public service events and elsewhere. You meet some great people who are devoted to public service. I came here from Allentown. I lived there before I moved to Maryland, and before that I was in California. And one thing that really impresses me about this area is the spirit of public service in this part of Maryland. You meet a lot of people who are very happy to volunteer. Um, we get a lot of appreciation from the event organizers, the public service events, and I seem to collect a lot of T-shirts, and Andy probably collects a lot more than I do. You get to spend time outdoors, and you get a lot of those sincere thank yous, and makes it all worthwhile. Okay, so I think that's everything I have. Um, that's me. And I do have some, I get asked sometimes what sort of equipment should I get for
I
digital?
know people want to talk about this. Before you do that, Dan,
Yeah.
one of the people, our participants, is saying, could you give an example of day to day what it would be like for for someone to be helping in an emergency situation?
Yeah.
How long is one expected to be there, and what kind of tasks would they have? Just give us a typical scenario.
Okay. Well, most often for us it's weather related, and um, the I think four or so weather events that I've been with, I was asked, to deploy to one of the local fire stations in case communications went down, and to observe the weather at that fire station and report regularly. And so it was like a 12-hour deployment in our typical tropical storm or near hurricane kind of condition. Um, the I've also been asked to support weather events from the EOC, and again, it's like in the one case I'm thinking of, I was asked to go to the EOC before Tropical Storm Sandy or Hurricane Sandy, depending on what you want to call it, before that hit. So I deployed to the EOC at I think it was around 5 p.m. and I stayed there till like 6 a.m. the next morning.
And
And
who directed you to go there, and at what point, how were you relieved of duty? How did that all
yeah,
work?
yeah. So the way it would work here and the way it has worked is I got a call from OEM, our OEM liaison at the time, and they told me, Tropical Storm Sandy or Hurricane Sandy, it still was a hurricane at that time, is predicted to hit in, I think it was like late in the evening. And we'd like you to come to the EOC and support communications with your operators from there. Um, at that time, they didn't feel like they needed operators at the fire stations, but they asked us to observe weather in place. So I, I unfortunately it kind of hit us quickly, and I did not have the. Actually, let me correct myself. I think I was relieved by Andy. Andy can speak up and tell me if my memory is right. And Andy took over at when I left in the morning, and Andy stayed until Sandy had passed. So it was basically Andy and I over two shifts for that one. But that's in terms of who would deploy us. It's OEM, and now they also have the opportunity to notify us via Everbridge, that paging service, and we haven't really exercised that capability yet. But if we get a page through Everbridge, and usually OEM would ask Andy or I, we want to deploy you guys. What do you think we should put in the Everbridge message? And usually what we put in those messages is something like, we're going to be deployed um, we are going to call up the net on our main repeater, which is about a mile from me, at a given time, and we'd like everybody who receives the message, first to acknowledge receipt in Everbridge, and then to join us on the net, and we'll describe how we're going to deploy at that time. Did I answer the question? I hope so.
Yeah, I think so. The other question is, so, and maybe you just answered it there, you using the repeater and the Everbridge, that's how you activated your net of weather reporters.
Yeah, we haven't done it that way yet. In the past, what we would usually do is, call up on the repeater and see who was around. So,
who's listening?
But now the plan is to use Everbridge to alert everybody and then get on a net.
Well, of course, all the members of your team know that a storm is coming, so they're aware that they might be they might be needed for whatever reason. So it's not like it's a surprise.
Yeah. Yep. So
how about response to an emergency situation where you would you guys provide, for example, communications for medical personnel who are responding to an emergency, or do they pretty much have their own systems? And
with the exception of that trunking radio issue in Patapsco Valley State Park, they would typically have their own communications equipment. That particular situation hasn't happened that I can think of, but we're there to support them if they need it and if OEM asks for it.
So if it's conceivable that you could have to deploy to some site of some sort with VHF equipment and provide some sort of backup column.
Yep. That's a possible scenario.
Let me see. So with possibility of government agencies such as FEMA and NOAA being defunded, what's the impact of that?
Well, FEMA is primarily a funding agency. They provide funding to MDEM and other purposes. So yeah, if they're defunded, then I don't know that it would immediately impact emergency response here, but it would definitely impact the capabilities of MDEM, and secondarily would impact us. But I don't think there's, the county is certainly still going to have their radio capabilities. And
they're going to have the fire department and the emergency medical and EMS and all that.
Yeah. So as far as I know, those are funded by the county. So and of course the county does get some amount of federal funding, but so I don't think it's good if FEMA or other government federal agencies have reduced funding, but I don't think it would stop emergency response in the county here. And I don't envision that the county asking races to step in for the professionals that serve them.
Hey, Tom, Dan, could I add a comment?
Sure.
So I know with FEMA, I think the discussion continues, but I was at a conference on Tuesday at Maryland Department of Emergency Management, and the discussion really evolved around the fact that emergencies are first and foremost dealt with locally, and that it will, I guess, once local resources are exhausted or extended to a point where they can no longer contend with the emergency, then it goes upward to the state and so forth and so on. But the focus and I guess the shift, if you want to call it a shift or a conversation, the evolving conversation, I should say, trying to say, is that they want to place emphasis on having emergencies dealt with at the lowest level possible and then supported by others as needed based upon the extent of the situation in question. And so I think there's always going to be a need for MDEM, there's always going to be a need for FEMA, but their roles and how they support particular emergencies is probably going to change in a manner that, again, focuses placing emphasis on dealing with the local emergency at the local level first.
Yeah, I think
guess
that.
I think we can let the question slide here at this point. The point is, there's still going to be a requirement on the ground for support from ARES and RACES in an emergency situation.
I think that's true, Tom.
Is OEM locally run? And the answer to that is yes.
I'm sorry, what? Can you repeat that, Tom?
Is OEM locally run?
Yes, it's part of the Department of Fire and Rescue Services in Howard County.
In the county.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. That's all the questions. So you go ahead and get back to your slide there.
Okay. Well, I'm not going to read through it, but I get occasionally asked, what kind of digital equipment do I need for participating in FLDG and WinLink? And it's really pretty simple. You need a VHF UHF radio with some sort of packet port. The older radios have a 6-pin DIN connector on the back of them. Newer radios, at least for Yaesu, they have a 10-pin connector that typically you'll either need a cable made for that proprietary connector or an adapter that provides the 6-pin connector that's more common. You need a computer, and you can run these modes with PCs or Macs, and you can also run them on Raspberry Pis, Linux, just about every operating system. Computer is needed, and you don't need a really high performance computer. The one I carry around with me when I'm doing this kind of stuff is one that I paid $200 for. It has an Intel i3 processor in it, 4 gigabytes of memory, and 256 gigabyte solid state disk. Very inexpensive machine. You need a sound card interface that enables the computer to talk to the radio. Digirig is probably the most popular now. It's their website, I think, is digirig.net. But if you Google Digirig, you'll find it, whatever it is. There it is, digirig.net. And so that one's very popular. It's very small, relatively inexpensive. The $70 to $90, which includes the case and the cables that you need. What I like about it, two things. One is it's very rugged. It's a very solid aluminum case, and the other is it doesn't have any knobs that get twisted and changed. All of the adjustments for it are done on the PC or the radio. So some of the interfaces, they have too many knobs to twist and turn. It gets all messed up. Okay, the other, Masters Communications, also makes some very good interfaces. The one I usually recommend to people if they want to go that route is what they call the DRA 50. And then there are lots and lots of other options, including a do-it-yourself. There are a number of do-it-yourself solutions on the web. Some radios have the interface built in, like the FT991A that Yaesu sells. In terms of modes, we mostly use 8 PSK 1200F for FLDigi. It's a pretty high-speed mode. We usually practice sending low-resolution pictures as part of our weekly practices. And it takes about 3 minutes to send a 20 kilobyte file. The setup I'm describing also supports WinLink but WinLink doesn't include a built-in sound modem in it. So you have to connect WinLink Express, which is the email client, to some sort of soft modem. And the ones we use typically are either sound modem or VARA. And I've listed all of the places you can get that stuff. And of course, I'll provide this presentation for Tom and Roll. And that's pretty much it in terms of what you need to get to participate in either WinLink or FLDigi. And FLDigi is our preferred mode within Howard County. And WinLink, you basically need WinLink because it's used in other jurisdictions here and elsewhere. And they're both really nice programs, and we try to be proficient in both. Okay, that's.
Here's something called TPRFN.
I'm sorry, I don't recognize it. TPRFN?
Hang on a second. I got to figure out what the acronym is for. The Packet Radio Forwarding Network.
Okay, I'm not familiar with that one, I'll just confess.
One of our participants in Texas says in Montgomery County, Texas, Packet's part of their EOC infrastructure there.
Ah, okay.
I'll let him communicate directly with you about that.
Okay. Well, that sounds neat. I forgot to mention in passing that one of the facilities that the county hosts for us is our local WinLink node. So we have a node in a Howard County facility that people can send WinLink radio email through.
How about you can always count on somebody to ask this question. What about solutions for WinLink on a Mac?
We have people who run WinLink on their Macs. Usually they do it through a virtual machine. And there are a couple of them. I don't remember them off the top of the head. I'm a PC user, and WinLink Express, which is the preferred client, is a PC only app. But there are a number. On a Mac you can run WinLink Express in a virtual machine, or there are also clients that run on a Mac which will talk to WinLink, but it's a little more effort to set up. And the same is true of Linux. There are clients on Linux that you can use with WinLink. Are there any more questions, Tom? I'm not hearing anything.
It would help if I unmuted, wouldn't it?
Okay.
There's something called WOAD, WinLink on Android.
Yes, I'm familiar with that one. It's a client that runs on an Android phone, and I have it on my phone. I've only used it to send test messages, and it seems to work fine.
Cool.
So you can get that on the Google Play Store.
I'm not sure if I'll read the question and let you respond. Do you encounter occasions where government agencies are reluctant to open ports of their internet connections, and how have you solved that problem?
Oh, that's a really good question, and we have a good story on that. So Howard County has a Howard County network, which is used for all sorts of communications within the county, and they were reluctant to let us connect to that network. Um, for obvious reasons, we carry around our own computers that they don't have control over, and they obviously do not want to pick up a virus or some other malicious piece of software because one of our operators connects his computer and he's unaware that it's got something on it. So luckily they do have, so we're not able to communicate directly from, let's say, our computers to computers or other assets on the Howard County network. Now, luckily, Howard County has a public radio network, and it's available at all Howard County facilities. And so when we're for instance at the EOC or in any county fire station elsewhere, we are able to access the internet. And the way we've used that capability is we've asked the county to provide access to that public network in our repeater facilities and also where our WinLink node is located. And so we can use that network to connect our WinLink node to the global WinLink network. So that's how we're connected to the WinLink network. And we can also use that network to talk to our repeater facilities in their various Howard County nodes. So basically, with that capability, we're able to use the internet, access the internet, and communicate with our radio equipment in the various locations where it's at. And if we need to talk to OEM or whoever, we have to do that via email, but that's perfectly acceptable to us. And just a more recent note, we now have two of our repeaters linked via that capability. They talk through the internet to each other, and that's using the Howard County public net, and that's all working very well. So the answer is, Howard County does not want us to access their internal network directly, but they do provide network connections where we need them. Hopefully that was clear.
I got a note from N1OPS, Robert, that Radio Mail is a nice WinLink client for iOS devices. So
Okay, that's good.
Put that in the chat window for everybody.
That's good. Yeah, I think most of our operators are using just a virtual machine with the WinLink Express PC app. But I'm glad there is a client that's pure iOS.
Okay, you guys want to wrap it up, summarize, anything else?
No, I just thank you for the opportunity, and I hope I gave a presentation that's very Howard County centric, but as we noted, RACES is a local government function. So, but I hope it, what I said encourages people to get involved with your local community, either through Aries or through your local government. And it is a lot of fun, and it's also very rewarding. And I hope people do it. Andy, did you have anything you wanted to
No,
add?
I agree with everything you said. One thing that you said that really I think is important. I did not touch it, but you mentioned from a public service perspective, what clubs do, how radio operators demonstrate abilities in supporting recreational events or community events. Those are good references to point to when having a conversation with local emergency managers in trying to build an areas of races relationship, being able to identify and refer to your experience in those events is very helpful because then you have then you're a known quantity, you're not an unknown to them, and you can have those organizations reflect or refer to your ability to support them as an ability to support emergency communications more broadly if that's of interest. So I thought that was a really good point, Dan. I'm glad you mentioned it.
Okay. Thank you, Andy. All right, Tom and Raul, the ball's back with you.
Okay, well, thank you very much. Wonderful. I always enjoy this presentation. It's always fresh and new. Things are always happening. That you know, uh, their interface with the government agencies and so forth is an ongoing thing as they change their processes and procedures a little bit. But I know Kara's been doing this for decades now, literally, and is well thought of by the local emergency management system. Next week we have setting. This is one of the most popular events of our subjects. Alan Zimmerman, who spoke to you on digital before, is going to come back and talk to you about setting up a modern, or maybe not so modern, HF station. So many people, especially ones who've just gotten their license, are saying, how do I get an HF station together? And there are lots of ways of doing that. All of them are good, and there's no bad answers. But Alan's going to talk about that, and Kevin Zembauer, who's a very clever guy who has put together some really cool stuff that very inexpensively and very intriguing uh, approach to things. So he's going to talk too. And then the following week, June 18th, we have Ron Block, who's made his career in lightning protection, grounding, and bonding, and who wrote, I think, part of the handbook and a manual that I think is being sold by ARL on the subject. And it's also a popular question we get about how to protect your station. And then two of our local people are going to come talk about traffic handling. One of them, who wrote the book, literally, Al Nomeyer, WS3YBQ, he did literally write the ARL manual on traffic handling. So he's going to come in and talk about national traffic system and beyond, and how it interfaces from the local CW or phone net all the way through some very advanced uh, mesh networks and WinLink cross-country automatic stations, all kinds of cool stuff like that. So put those on your calendar for next week and June 18th. Tom, back to you.
I think we're all done. No more announcements here. So thanks again to Andy and Dan, and we'll see everybody next week. By the way, those of you who've asked, I've bugged Frank again up for about the fifth time to send me his presentation. So hopefully I'll get that tonight and I'll post it for you.
Well, we should have got him today. We didn't let him leave the
We
restaurant.
we did talk to him today.
Oh, you did?
Yeah,
No.
I'll send it to you. Don't worry. I'm like, okay. All right. Thank you, everybody. Have a great night.
Yep.
Thanks again, everyone.